I've had the chance to speak in front of many groups in many different settings. And I must tell you that this was one of the most daunting tasks I think I've ever faced, trying to put together some remarks for a group in front of me here today. Particularly when I think of the topic you've asked me to speak on of leadership and integrity. All one has to do is look at the people in the room here today and look how they live their personal lives, their professional lives, and they define leadership and integrity. And so I hope I can impart some wisdom on you, but more importantly, I hope we have a discussion, because I'm sure I can learn many things from people here in the room today. I thought I'd break my remarks down into three parts. First, a little background on who I am and where I came from. It always seems to be helpful to put things in perspective of how people got to wherever they are. And then talk about the 90s and 2000 and from a business perspective, looking at some of the things that happened within our profession, within my firm, and more importantly, I think, in the business community at large, and lessons to be learned from that. And maybe some reasons I reflect back, why did those things happen? What occurred? What were the lapses? And then finally, I'd like to spend a few minutes and share with you some thoughts I have about Gene Kelly. When I think of integrity, I think of courage to do the right thing, the faith to believe it'll work out. And Gene was a great leader, but more importantly, in the last days of his lives, he really demonstrated what integrity is all about and how he lived those last 90 days. And let's touch upon that with you as well. So with that, we'll get started. And I hope, again, that some of these stories can be helpful as we move through this. I come from a close-knit family of 6 kids in a span of 8.5 years. So we grew up in Bloomington, Minnesota, 3 boys and 3 girls. And my parents were, I'm blessed, they're both still with me today, but unwavering commitment to family and to faith. And I think that was an instrumental part of finding out who you are in life is what you see in those early years. They both have shaped my life in many ways. My father had a tremendous work ethic, worked 7 days a week, it seemed like, but 6 days at work and 1 day at home, catching up on all the chores. And a tremendous amount of energy. I look back, I never remember my dad taking a nap ever. Just a tremendous amount of energy. My mother also played a very important role in my life. The thing that sticks out about my mom is that her great sense of humor and quick wit. And I have to tell you that in my current role, and many times through my career, I've drawn upon that sense of humor and quick wit to kind of put a little smile on my face, because as you know, some of the things that happen in life, you sit there and say, how did that ever happen? I can't make this stuff up. And you got to sit back and smile once in a while. And Mom has really helped me able to do that. John mentioned my wife Susan. We've married about 27 years. She's terrific and very supportive in both my personal life and professional life and raising our kids. Laura, our daughter, is 23. She graduated from Villanova last May and is working in the city now at IMG, a sports marketing company, living at home this year, which is really a special treat, having been gone for 4 years, having her back home. Our son is 18, hopefully off to college as we move forward to next fall. But seriously, he's a great kid, a very avid golfer, and he'll do very well in life. Thinking my mom's sense of humor, you go back and look at times and you look back on things, and I got my current role in June of 2005. And it was under very difficult circumstances, which I'll cover, but I remember calling up my parents and telling them about my new role, and they were so proud and telling all their friends, and it was on a Friday and very excited. And my mom calls me the next Thursday after a Wall Street Journal article, and she says, my friends want to know how you could mess it up so bad in 1 week at that firm you're at. In any event, so that was a good way to put a smile on your face and think about what was happening. I started in 1979 at KPMG in Minneapolis. I moved to New York in '97 to lead HR for the firm. I took over leading our audit practice in late fall, early winter of 2002, right at the breaking of Enron and the demise of Anderson. And that was a very challenging time as well. I assumed my current job, as John mentioned, in June of '05. It was a job I had always dreamed about having, and I was really thrilled looking back at my career thinking, could I ever have that job someday? I stepped into some of the saddest and most frightening days of my life when I took on this job. And so it really put kind of a bittersweet memory in taking back and looking back at that time. In a 2-week period of time prior to taking on my job, I learned that my firm was facing a possible indictment. My partner and good friend, Gene Kelly, was facing an inoperable brain tumor. My partners didn't know where the firm was at that point in time. There wasn't a clear direction where we were at. The marketplace didn't have a good sense of where we were at that point in time as well. I kept thinking about a few years earlier when I just took over the lead audit. and in the first real crisis in the profession that I can remember with Arthur Andersen and the tragedy that struck that firm. I remember traveling around the country for months on end, meeting with hundreds and hundreds of Andersen partners. And I remember the looks on their faces, talking about their careers, a passion for their firm, how their lives had been turned upside down, what just happened to their firm. And now I'd been asked to lead my firm that was facing possibly the same fate as Arthur Andersen. I was scared, and I remember talking to Susan that night before I became chairman. We just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary, and I remember sitting back a couple weeks ago talking about how blessed we were and how fortunate we were in the life we had and the things we had accomplished. And this was really the first time that I could remember in a long time that I didn't have a clear sense of where the future was going. I didn't have a clear sense of the path that you'd follow to get through this challenge. I hoped that I could draw upon my experiences, my integrity, and some of the leadership skills I developed to try and find that path, but I really didn't know what it was going to entail. I had an incredible supportive board, people like John and the board to help us through it, and 3 very special partners that I asked to step in and help me in leadership roles. One was John Vimar, my deputy chairman, Jack Taylor, who I'd worked many years with in running audit, and Judge Sven Holm, who joined us from sitting federal judge in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a couple months earlier. And we really formed a bond over that period of that summer, working through the challenges that we had. And through all that and facing all that, I had this sense of calm. I had this sense that it was going to work out. I really had the faith we'd find some way to make it work through that whole process. But again, didn't know the path. You know, I had 1,600 partners that were counting on this firm for their livelihood, 20,000 people. And we had some pretty tough decisions we had to make in some pretty short period of time to make those decisions. What we're going to do as a firm. We're going to admit what happened. We're going to come forward and talk about the issues that face the firm. How do you tell the partners? What do you do in terms of moving the firm forward in a direction? What's it look like going forward? And all those things. So a great sense of responsibility. And it wasn't easy. The first weekend we spent down in Washington, D.C., the 4 of us with the attorneys, sorting through what the options were, went to justice on Monday morning, and admitted our firm had lost its way, admitted we did some wrong things. Very difficult thing to do. I knew that would have significant implications on a handful of people's lives, probably the rest of their lives. But we had to make that decision. And we made it, I believe, based upon integrity, based upon the facts, and based upon the values that my firm has stood for over 100 years. There were no promises made by the Department of Justice that meeting. We didn't know if they would still indict us, if we could reach some kind of agreement that would allow us to continue, would our partners stay, would our people stay, would the clients stay, and all those things. It turned out that our partners were terrific. Our partners gave us the opportunity. We asked them for 90 days. Give us 90 days and trust us with 90 days to work through this. You take care of the people and the clients. We want to earn your trust. We'll work our way through it. And we did. And we came out of it a much stronger firm. And I think one of the key things there was getting the faith of our partners and the trust of our partners. We lost 5 partners in those 90 days out of 1,600 people. And that's really what turned the corner. And they put their faith and trust in leadership and the integrity of leadership. And I think it's really what we're all about, people in this room, the roles we have to play. So let's talk about leadership and integrity for a few minutes. If you look up in the dictionary, integrity says a steadfast adherence to a strict moral or ethical code, a state of being wholesome, unimpaired, the quality, the condition of being pure and complete. The Lumen says integrity is consistency between what one professes to be and how one lives his or her life. Integrity is something that we all start out with in our lives. It's something that can be easily lost, but it's always, always in our control to retain. It's something you've never taken for granted and something that sadly many people think is missing in the business world today. It's also something that once it is lost, it's almost impossible to regain. Integrity to me is very simple and very similar to Lumen's definition. It is knowing what's right and wrong and living accordingly. Over the past several years, integrity in business has been questioned. You go back and look at American history and business, and for the most part, people here are the highest values, the highest state of integrity, the people here in this room. But if you go back to the 90s and early 2000s and look at the state of business at that point in time, when Alan Greenspan said, we look at the common irrational exuberance in the marketplace, So anybody with a website and a business plan could get funding. Market potential was rewarded, not results. A whole generation of business leaders being developed never lived through a downturn. Investors' expectations kept increasing, and business people tried to match and exceed those expectations. Commitments for increasing earnings became more difficult to achieve. Most companies faced this reality the best they could, within the rules and the values, with integrity. They acted with integrity. Others took a different approach. Promises were made, deals were cut, corners were shaved. Their actions were rationalized. If you want to be part of the action, then you had to do what everybody else was doing. It must be okay because others are doing it as well. Have an investment bank give you IPO shares. In turn, they get your investment banking business. Apparently that was okay. After hours trading in mutual funds when the market was closed, that was okay as well. Sure, you could enter into a side agreement with a customer on a contract because you knew about it, even though others didn't. You agreed upon it. Round-trip revenue transaction, helping out a former company. They'd do something for you down the road. What was the harm? It'd get reversed next quarter. That'd be okay. And oh yes, let's not forget backdating of stock options, throwing lavish parties, and other things. How did people get to that point? In hindsight, when you look at these things, it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear. But how did people make those decisions? In many cases, these were intentional acts. In most cases, they involve a number of people. In most cases, some of those respected people in their organization, and in some, very leaders of those organizations. If you look back the clock and look at your careers, I'm sure everyone in this room, it'd be very clear, you would never make those decisions. You would never do that. So why did other people do it? What drew them to make those decisions? I thought a lot about it because of what happened in my firm as well. I break it down to kind of three things I think really impacted. One I call rationalization. People focused on their intent of their actions, not the reality of their actions. It's for the greater good. If I can just get by this quarter, I'll never do it again. If I can just get this one customer to sign up, I'll be okay. I'm doing this to save people's jobs, to save the stock price, to save the company. It's a temporary fix. I won't do it again. Besides, everybody else is doing it as well. Rationalization of acts. Or implied permission. Look, everyone knows I'm doing this. No one's telling me to stop. It must be okay. If Joe didn't think it was right, Joe would tell me to stop. Joe would never do anything that would hurt me or get me in trouble. Or the fear factor. I can't be the one to stop this. I might lose my job. It's not my job to tell Joe no. Surely Joe's boss knows he's doing it as well. Let them tell him to stop it. I'm going to keep my head down and just do my job. Not long ago, the Wall Street Journal had an article by Warren Buffett who said the 5 most dangerous words in business is everybody else is doing it. In almost all these cases, seemingly minor things became bigger things. Lines became blurred and eventually erased. Often, no one realized the lines were moving from gray to black and crossing the lines, from right to wrong. In retrospect, it's very clear that people lost their ways. The very foundations of companies were shaken. I think it really starts at the tone at the top. I think it really does start at the leadership level. I think leaders make a huge difference on setting the tone in the organizations, setting the tone for integrity, showing people the way. Make sure they create a culture where the fear factor doesn't take over, a culture where they know their roles and responsibilities, a culture where they can't rationalize away their actions. I have a lot of chance to talk to students today, and I go through a series of case studies when I speak with those students, and I talk about integrity, and I talk about the role that they will play in business going forward, and that they have to set their own moral compass. They have to define what path they're going to go on, and they'll be challenged, and they'll be tempted to get ahead and do different things. And they always have to sit back and think about what is the right thing to do. Set their own values that will guide them through that process. Let's turn back to the headlines for a second that my firm made related to tax shelters. I'm embarrassed that it happened. I'm embarrassed our internal control system didn't catch it at its infancy and stop it. I'm embarrassed that our governance system didn't catch it as well. Since June of '05, we made several structural and governance changes, and I am confident some of that could never happen again within my firm. We've emerged a stronger firm, a more committed firm to professionalism and integrity. I call it our promise of professionalism, first to each other as partners, then to the clients and the capital markets that we serve. We've established what I call a values-based compliance culture. A culture where if someone sees something wrong, if someone sees something varying from our values, from our professional responsibilities, that they feel compelled, not obligated, but compelled to raise their hand and point that out. And when they do, they know that it will be fairly and constructively reviewed and analyzed, if it's Tim Flynn or somebody else involved. And when we get done doing the right thing to correct that indiscretion, to correct that issue, the person who raised his or her hand won't be pushed down and shunned in the organization, but they'll be recognized and rewarded for living our value-based compliance culture, for delivering upon our promise of professionalism. That's what we want to make sure our culture is at KPMG, and that's what I'm trying to drive as a leader. We must have a culture where bad behavior cannot be rationalized, where people cannot mistake the lack of action for implied permission to do the wrong thing, where no one fears for their job when they raise the issues of possible concerns. A culture that when someone sees a fellow worker starting to veer outside the white lines, helps and stops them before they get in the ditch, and recognizes that's part of their responsibility. If you go back to the Wall Street Journal article I mentioned a few minutes ago, Warren Buffett went on to say that the chances that his company's 200,000 employees will always behave in the right way are nil. But he added, we can have a huge effect in minimizing such activities by jumping on anything immediately when there's a slightest bit of impropriety and taking the right corrective action. And that's the kind of environment we're trying to create at KPMG. That's the kind of leadership that we're trying to bring across all of our partners to our 20,000 people. Our people know what's right and wrong. We want to create a culture where they know they must also do the right thing every time and do it in the right way. When I think about it, integrity takes courage. Courage to always do the right thing, regardless of the personal consequences. It takes great faith. Faith to believe the system will support one's actions, regardless how difficult the challenge or the obstacles for those involved. In closing, let me turn to one of the greatest lessons in courage and faith that I've ever witnessed, how my friend and partner Gene O'Kelly faced his impending death. It was a great lesson for me, and I want to share it with you. I remember clearly this beautiful day in June at the St. Regency Hotel where I met Gene for breakfast. Now, I had just come into my role about 2 weeks, facing all kinds of issues and challenges, and here's a man that's been told he has 90 days to live. He looked great. He looked relaxed. He told me he had just finished a walk in the park with his wife, Corinne, and he was feeling terrific. It was during that breakfast that Gene gave me a gift to look for perfect moments in every day. I asked Gene how he was doing, and while he looked great, I couldn't help but wonder, how was he really doing? In some 30 days, he'd stepped down from chairman and CEO role, he'd been told he had inoperable brain cancer, and he was fighting for his life. I didn't know how to convey my thoughts, and Gene knew I was having some challenges in my current role as well. And Gene looked at me and he said, Tim, and he had a big smile, I'm doing really well. I feel really great. He talked about the tremendous gift he'd been given, to know he had 90 days to live. He talked about how he was going to live those 90 days while he was dying. It was the most incredible conversation I've ever had with somebody. I remember calling Susan, my wife, on the way home after the breakfast meeting, and I said, that was the most inspirational hour and a half I've ever spent with anybody. Gene talked about his philosophy. He said, Tim, you know, in my role as chairman and CEO of the firm, I was always looking back at decisions I had just made and wondering, did I make the right decision? Or I was looking forward to the challenges of the day and thinking of all the things I had to accomplish. He said, I never really just sat back and enjoyed the moment. I never really sat back and focused on what was happening in front of me right at this point in time. Gene talked about his faith, the love he had and felt for his wife, Corinne, and he talked about his walks in the park. He said, Tim, when I was so focused on work, I never took time to walk in the park with Corinne. Now we can do that. It's a gift. He talked about the tranquility and peace he felt at the cloisters in the Upper East Side, where he'd go to reflect on his life, his faith, and the journey that lied ahead of him. It was through these reflections that Gene learned how to live while he was dying. He said he was truly blessed with this gift. A gift that would bring him more precious moments in these 90 days than some people would experience in a lifetime. That was his goal. He talked about going through this stage in life with a very simple philosophy. He would meet with someone and talk to them and have a conversation. Really focus on the moment, not worrying what might happen tomorrow, what happened yesterday, and really listen to the richness of that conversation. He'd do this throughout the day. At night, he'd go down on his knees, he'd pray, he'd sit before he went to sleep, take out a piece of paper, and he'd reflect upon notes he made after each one of those meetings. And he'd think about the perfect moments he had each day, those perfect moments. And that gave him the strength to go on to the next day. And that's what he told me, how he was going to live his life while he was dying. And that was the gift that he felt he received by knowing what the time would be. When I left that meeting, I got halfway back home. I talked to Susan, and I called Gene back up. I said, Gene, would you mind if I asked someone to come work with you and try and capture your thoughts so we could develop a manuscript and share those with KPMG? I said, that was just terrific. And Gene thought about it for a little bit, and he called me back the next day, and he said he'd be happy to do it. And we hired an author and co-authored a book with Gene called Chasing Daylight. And that manuscript became into a book that's, some of you may have read it, but it's a terrific story of Gene's Chasing Daylight and how he's going to maximize the time he had. Again, the courage and faith that takes, I think, is a great example of integrity and leadership. We must have the courage to do what's right. We must have the faith to believe it's going to work out. We must draw upon others to help us in that process. We can't do it alone. And so that's my story. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you here today. And I am humbled by the chance to speak with you and look forward to having a dialogue about leadership and integrity. Thank you very, very much.